Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder. You're watching Alaska Weather, and thanks for joining us here tonight on this January the 30th. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information, and you can do that easily by remembering this number and writing it down. 1-800-472-0391 is your link to the Alaska Weather Information Line. A simple combination of numbers there will walk you through your forecast information. As always, St. Lawrence Island, that's 123, easy to remember for you. Other locations in Alaska will have a slightly different combination, of course, but you can always check in on your friends around Gamble and Savunga if you like to use that combination. So write down that number when you step through the process, and you can remember it just as easily as the folks out in the Bering Strait. Weather.gov/Alaska is how you find us online, and if you can't find what you're looking for there, whether it's a click on your forecast information, the ice thickness, maybe you'd like to look at some satellite pictures, let me know. You can find me at david.snyder@noaa.gov, and I am privileged and happy to serve you any way I can when it comes to finding weather information around Alaska, so do let me know. Let's take a look at hazardous weather across the state. What we're not going to see on this map just yet is any advisory, watch, or warning for southeastern Alaska. That could change tomorrow as a lot of cold air spilling southward. For Mariners, you are going to see some alerts for strong winds through some of the inside passages. Maybe some alerts for heavy freezing spray, so keep watch on that. But let's focus on what we've got on the map for the interior today. The areas shaded in yellow are winter weather advisories. That goes for the southeastern Brooks Range, the eastern Alaska Range out toward Denali, and also around Thompson Pass. So the issues are going to be wind, blowing through gaps and passes, especially for the mountain ranges here. And at times, probably transporting some snow. Blowing snow will limit your visibility as you move through, and probably some briefly dangerous wind chills. We're not talking about 50 to 60 below, otherwise we would have some type of wind chill alert. So the main issue is just going to be poor visibility and occasional wind gusts that might move you along the road in a way that you hadn't planned on. The best course of action in this case would be to plan ahead and go slow, of course, if you run into that. Make sure you've got some extra supplies in your car in case you pull off the side of the road and have to take a few minutes longer than you planned on. You've got some ways to stay warm and some food to eat and water just in case. For Thompson Pass, the good news is it's not going to snow tonight, but it is going to start blowing that snow around that is on the ground. So while we don't expect to have really bad weather moving in, it is just going to be a lot of wind moving through. So if you are moving through the pass, chances are visibility is going to go down pretty hard. With those winds gusting tonight and into tomorrow, travel might be a little bit tricky there. So be safe if you're traveling through Thompson Pass. Plan on some travel troubles there because of the blowing snow. And be safe as you go. And that goes to our DOT crews out there. Thank you for serving our state. We certainly appreciate your attention around Thompson Pass and the roads. A look out to the west shows a orange color there for the Bering Strait, Norton Sound and the lower Yukon Delta, and the river areas there from Grayling west to Hooper Bay, north to Nome, and west toward our friends in St. Lawrence Island and around Gamble and Savunga. It's a winter storm watch, and we are expecting that we're going to have some pretty fierce winds moving through and about 6 to 8 inches of snow. If these things line up just right, it could turn into more than a winter storm, more like blizzard conditions for some cases. So keep watch on the weather as we go ahead in time, but it does look like the potential is there for blizzard conditions for the Bering Strait communities, to Nome, St. Lawrence Island, and the lower Yukon Delta into Norton Sound, including our friends in Unalakleet, out toward Hooper Bay, and all points in between. So weather's changing there, and not for the better. As we look at the satellite picture, again, we're still watching these waves of weather move up through the north and eastern Gulf Coast. The focus right now is a lot of moisture moving eastward, but the really big weather story that you don't really see on the satellite picture is this huge dome of cold air that's moving south and east. That's what's making that big weather story that you're hearing about on the news. All the Midwesterners in the north and the Great Plains and eventually the East Coast, where it's going to be oh so cold. Yes, it is going to be cold, and it'll go through their region briefly, and it is a sizable cold snap for them. But for Alaskans, we're just going to get a grazing, glancing blow from this cold bubble of air that is super cold indeed. But as this moves towards southeast, southeast is going to be the area in Alaska that takes the most impact from this passing cold. And initially what that will do is create quite a bit of wind across the inside passages here. So we're just setting the stage for this now. By tomorrow and Friday and Saturday, you will be colder and you will certainly be windier. On top of that, there may be some areas of rain and snow passing through as well, as low pressure is dragging that cold air through the gaps and passes. So if you're in southeast, especially northern southeast, a good time to start thinking about how that wind may reshape your day a little bit tomorrow and Friday and going forward. Out across the west, you can see some clouds moving in across the western Bering and the North Pacific. There are going to be several waves of very potent areas of low pressure moving through. One of those is going to move quickly north and east, and that's what's bringing us the opportunity for a potential blizzard there. And a winter storm watch has been posted to talk about that as we go into the next 24 to 36 hours. For South Central, it's been a mix of rain and snow and fog. Not a whole lot's changed there. Homer was reporting some heavier snow probably along the bluff this afternoon. Up north, Birchwood was looking at some pretty dense fog, and it was snowing as you head up the Parks Highway toward Healy and eventually on into Fairbanks. But you can see a wealth of dry air here across the Yukon Valley and eastward toward the Tanana Valley and out toward Dawson, and it is cold. As we look at the surface map today, you can see a stationary boundary kind of wiggling its way across the higher terrain of southern and eastern Alaska. Rain was falling across southeast, pockets of fog here and there, dense fog across parts of south central, high pressure across the north slope. The blizzard conditions across Kaktovik and the eastern Beaufort Seacoast had improved substantially, so those advisories and warnings have been dropped. Out across the west, a 972 millibar low will lift northward and eastward as we head into tonight. You'll notice that deepening of low pressure out across the west, and as it does that, the wind should come up across the central and western chain. At least strong gales, maybe some stronger winds out there as we go. We'll check the marine forecast in just a bit, but we are watching the development of a tightening pressure gradient around the Bering Strait. And we're still watching for areas of blowing snow across the Brooks Range, so that's where those winter weather advisories come in. As low pressure develops and strengthens across the northern Gulf, you'll notice the pressure gradient here along the Alcan border between the high across the Yukon and the low across parts of northern and the eastern Gulf Coast. As that tightens up, the winds will also compensate for that and try and equalize the pressure. And as that forms and strengthens over southeastern Alaska, the winds will come up. And heavy freezing spray may be found in northern and central parts of southeast. So again, keep watch on that and plan for that. If it doesn't happen, all the better. If it does happen, you'll remember that we've already talked about this, and oh yeah, there it is. That's right. So be careful out there. 951 millibar low across the western chain Thursday afternoon. Notice that strong south and easterly flow moving across the bulk of the Bering Sea. Otherwise, fairly dry weather though across the interior, across the west and southwest. Once again, those crossed arrows mean blowing snow possible, so that could reduce visibility. And we would expect to see those conditions improving across the eastern and central Beaufort Seacoast, with some areas of fog perhaps down into the Yukon Valley. This is where the greatest cold will be, and those temperatures could be well below 20 to 30 below in some cases as that bulk of the cold travels into the interior of Canada. By Friday, that surface boundary across the north and eastern Gulf is still there, but it's pushing offshore. But that allows more of southeast to get involved in that strong north and channeled wind coming in with the cold. So for all of our friends in the Panhandle, plan on cold and plan on wind. And in the marine areas, again, plan on at least the possibility of heavy freezing spray. Watch for blowing snow to continue, but that threat shifts a little bit further south into the Yukon Valley, and a trough of low pressure tracking north and east now, not so much of a front, but a stronger pressure gradient will enhance the opportunity for blizzard conditions across the Bering Strait, Norton Sound, and the Yukon Delta as we get into Thursday and Friday. So watch for changes there. Another low coming in across the central and southern Bering Sea at 964 millibars will send another surge of moisture, low pressure, and wind north and east as we go toward the weekend. So again, changes and worsening weather will be reinforced over and over again until we go under a major pattern change at this point. Let's take a look at temperatures quickly. Mid to upper 30s tonight for southeast, teens and 20s for south central, Kodiak 29, Cordova 24, Talkeetna about 16 degrees. Moving north of the Alaska Range, you're quickly going below zero, anywhere from 10 to 20 below from Healy up toward Fairbanks and Denali. For Fort Yukon 28 below, anywhere from 10 to 30 below across the North Slope. Atkasuk 26 below, 6 above in Nome, 6 above for Bethel as well, teens and 20s for Bristol Bay. High temperatures tomorrow afternoon in the 30s and 40s, the coldest weather in the north around Haines and Skagway, 20s and 30s for South Central and Prince William Sound, 37 in Kodiak, 9 below in Fairbanks, 22 for Fort Yukon, Arctic Village 19 below. Grayling, you look about 7 to 10 degrees there, 11 in Bethel. And it looks like 20s and 30s for Bristol Bay. Dutch Harbor and Unalaska closer to 40. Overnight lows close to 40 below in Fort Yukon for Friday morning, and a high there only 26 below on Friday.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
And on to your aviation weather now. Again, several waves are moving north and working their way into the south central and southeastern coastlines. A lot of that residual moisture is moving northward, and we have a powerful low deepening out in the North Pacific and moving a band of precipitation, low visibility, and low ceilings into the Bering Sea. We're going to see that process repeat several times as well. But what you'll notice across the interior and the north and west is a lot of our visibility will be greatly improved over where it's been for the last couple weeks as colder, drier air is moving in. Short of some isolated and patchy areas of fog, really won't see a whole lot of that change as we move into Thursday afternoon. But what you will notice as we get into the day is that IFR conditions are going to linger around the misty fjords south of Craig, Klawock, Ketchikan, and into Annette. North of that, you get into a little bit of a MVFR region around Port Alexander, just about to Sitka, and then north of that, while it's going to be windy, it does look like you're going to have generally VFR conditions there. Out across south and west, MVFR across most of our southwestern capes up through Ammonach, west towards St. Matthew, and then once you get back down to the Pribilofs, you're looking at IFR for Thursday. That's not great news, as Thursday is generally flying day out there. As you look at the eastern chain, Unalaska, Nikolsky out to Akutan, and pushing its way toward Cold Bay, False Pass, and King Cove. That will gradually move your way as we get into Friday. Watch for MVFR most likely. Around the Beaufort Seacoast and through Anaktuvuk and Adigan Pass, look for improving areas of MVFR. That should go away as we get into Friday morning. Here comes a second band of IFR working its way across the central and western chain, getting closer and closer to Adak. As we look at the Alaska Peninsula up toward Port Heiden, just about Pilot Point, you're looking at IFR conditions for your Friday morning all the way down toward the Shumagon Islands and Sand Point. Marginal conditions out to sea. For southeast, a clearer, brighter start for you, it looks like, with patchy areas of MVFR across the upper Yukon Valley, closer to Eagle, most of south central, the Copper River Valley, the west coast, and the North Slope should start out with VFR, and that's going to continue through most of your Friday, but you'll notice IFR working its way into the south and western coast from St. Lawrence Island all the way down toward Bethel, King Salmon, Dillingham, Kodiak, Akiak, south and west toward False Pass, Cold Bay, and King Cove once again. Unalaska, Dutch Harbor, Akutan, and you know the rest of them up the chain. Looks like IFR conditions will be the rule for your Friday afternoon. Southeast still holding pretty good for the afternoon with marginal conditions trying to sneak in into areas closer to the Dixon entrance outside of Prince William Sound and up toward Homer, it looks like, into Kachemak Bay. Let's take a look at your pass conditions. Anaktuvuk Pass probably will push over toward VFR conditions by the afternoon tomorrow. Adigan may not make it all the way there, so you might want to steer westward just a little bit more. Marginal conditions through most of the day. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass should see some improving weather for visibility and ceilings as we get through your Thursday afternoon. Randy Pass will be under similar improvement conditions there, VFR, by the end of the day. And then eastward, things look pretty good most of the way for Windy Pass, Isabel Pass looking like VFR, Mentasta Pass moves toward VFR after an MVFR start on your Thursday. Tanita Pass looks to be VFR through most of the day. Might start to see some turbulence in the region around Portage Pass, visual flight rules expected, and Chilkoot and White Pass expected to improve as the day goes on. With each wave that we see coming off the North Pacific, we're going to see a jump in those freezing levels. Right now it looks like the 2,000 and 4,000 foot lines don't quite make it to the Pribilofs as we start your Thursday morning, but this will gradually shift eastward as we get into Friday. For southeast, levels are as high as 2,000 feet around Gustavus, just south of Haines and Skagway, and right over Juneau, south of the Dixon entrance, and over Haida Gwaii, you see the 4,000 foot line there, and again, most of the state obviously below freezing at the surface. Icing potential is up there with warmth spreading into the Bering. You see levels here out in the west from 7 to 8, even 10,000 feet across Unalaska and Dutch Harbor, and about 3,000 feet across the extreme southern capes there around southeastern Alaska as this moisture is moving away. Most of the rest of the state doesn't seem to have a significant icing concern right now. Crazy stuff on the jet stream. Looks like crazy octopus for us today. Strong westerly flow coming into the Pacific and taking a hard bend north into the Bering. That's that organizing area of low pressure. And then a deep trough into the mid-latitudes. The main power of the cold, though, is being shunted off into the lower 48 states. That's that polar vortex everyone's talking about on TV right now, all controlled by high pressure over the Chukchi. We have northerly winds over most of the state and the interior, 20 to 35 knots from tip to tail. And across the west and the Bering, more of a south and westerly flow with 50 to 85 knots there. Strong winds up the west coast there at 3,000 feet, 50 to 60 knots, some of those over the Pribilofs, and low pressure also dragging offshore winds over southeast. Again, most of the state looking at northerly winds over the interior. So turbulence focused on the chain below 4,000 feet, some of that isolated, severe, widespread, considerable, moderate across the Koyukuk and the middle Yukon Valley and St. Lawrence Island tomorrow. Welcome to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder with the National Weather Service, and joining us today, two more people to talk about the Augmented Reality Sandbox. It's Alana Valaji. She's a University of Alaska Fairbanks mechanical engineering student, helped design and work on the details to make this new type of sandbox there. Thanks for joining us, Alana. Thanks. And Courtney Breest, she's the outreach coordinator for EPSCoR, which is the experimental program to stimulate competitive research. It's a program funded nationally by the National Science Foundation, right?
Yes.
Okay. Alana, tell us about how you changed and adapted this version of the Augmented Reality Sandbox. It's a really cool tool.
So Gina approached us with 3 goals for this new version of the sandbox. They wanted it to be compact in a light system that could travel around the state. They wanted it to be child-oriented, so we designed the sandbox to have 3 different levels.
Okay.
It's pretty cool. You can have younger children. You can have high school kids. I guess I should say high school teenagers.
Sure.
And then we also designed it to be more marketable, user-friendly, so that this could be seen eventually in classrooms all over the place, all over the state.
Okay. And you had a big hand in this, but this was a team approach, right?
Definitely. It was a really good experience for myself, for George Stevens, who we'll see later.
One of our hand models today. Yeah.
For 2 other members who aren't here today, Cody Klingman and Austin Hunt. And it was just a really good learning experience all around.
Very good. And this is something that is part of your learning experience as well, so you get to check a box in your education.
Yeah,
right?
it's a requirement for seniors of mechanical engineering at University of Alaska Fairbanks.
Very good. Very good. Well, it is a wonderfully inquisitive tool, fun to play with, and I hope to get my hands in the sand here in just a little bit. But it's also part of a bigger program, something that we were talking about a moment ago, EPSCoR, and that's what Courtney is here to tell us more about. What is EPSCoR and why do you need a sandbox?
Well, EPSCoR, as you mentioned, is a national program. We're funded nationally, but we're actually located statewide. We're at UAF, we're at UAA, we're in Southeast at UAS, and she mentioned, you know, taking the sandbox as an educational tool, and that's where I'm an outreach coordinator for the South Central test case.
Okay.
Our focus is on the Kenai watershed, and we are really interested in using these tools like the sandbox to interact with the students down there and get them interested in STEM and also communicate the research findings that we've been having throughout the state.
Okay. And one of those, as George and Eric are kind of changing the contours for us there from UAF to maybe something that resembles a little bit of something more of the Kenai watershed, which is one of your focuses for the study, right? And specifically looking at some of the changes there and how that impacts people and also the salmon.
Yes, it is all of our research is social and environmental.
Okay.
So we have social scientists working hand in hand with our environmental scientists. One of the things we're studying is Upper Russian Lake, and we have a researcher taking sediment cores from that lake. So one of the things we're going to use the sandbox to communicate is how the landscape changed over a long period of time, thousands of years, going from glacier, covered by glacier ice, to being filled with water. And
that's what they're doing right now.
Exactly. So
live.
Exactly. So they're
so
moving
cool.
the water around. And then I think they've got some props over there, because we're also going to go a little bit more in depth and explain how the salmon got there.
Okay.
So using
and there's
these,
the salmon.
Exactly. Oh, I think there's a few more.
Yeah, we like more salmon in Alaska. More salmon.
Yeah, exactly. So it's really taking the findings from our research grant and just trying to connect with the community and translate it in a really hands-on and exciting way, so people can you know, interact with us as much as possible.
Well, sure, that makes the learning and the science real and quite literally in your face rather than just some boring black and white paper that you have to read about. This is something that people can understand better because it's visual and they're touching and feeling and seeing these changes, right?
Yeah, and get them engaged. And then outreach is a huge component, and working with the younger students, and actually even, I mean, working with the UAF graduate and engineering students it's a huge part of our grant, and we really enjoy it.
No, it is wonderfully exciting. And so, Alana, you were telling us that this is built to travel.
Right.
And this is built to do more things than version 1. Where can this type of project go in Alaska? And what can it demonstrate?
I mean, we were hoping to eventually get to villages that were harder to reach, that you couldn't necessarily move a whole fixed instrument to, right? You need something that can pack up, fit in your truck bed. I mean, one of the most attractive parts of this project is that this was going to be something that was used past our graduation point. You know, this is going to be something that lives in the state for years.
Right. Right. Well, it looks like you're well on your way with that. So what are, give me another example. What else can this show us? We've talked about the Kenai River watershed. What's the coolest thing that you've played in the sand with? What's your idea?
Well, I definitely enjoy the props, but we also like kind of building up a giant mound, and if you put some water behind it, you can make a little runway, I guess, and you know, demonstrate the effects of the hydrology by just putting up a dam and letting it all pour right down. And so that could, I think you mentioned it earlier, you could even demonstrate the effects of a tsunami.
Right.
Or something along those lines.
So it's not just topography, but it's also hydrology and coastal surge mapping and some of the coastal changes that we're seeing here in Alaska, and seeing what the smaller changes in the sandbox might do to kind of a real effect of a slosh or a push of water up on the coast. Tsunami inundation mapping, or even glacial dam release, as some has been demonstrated before. So wow, that's just an impressive thing. That it seems like the possibilities are nearly endless with this, and probably even more ideas that are popping up in your head too.
Yeah, as we speak.
Very cool. All right. Well, if folks want to get more information about EPSCoR, you guys are online. You're on Facebook, Twitter, and on YouTube. AKEPSCOR, right? EPSCoR, Alaska EPSCoR, that is. And again, you guys are funded by the National Science Foundation, so more to come from that, and a longer-term study there. Thank you, ladies, for joining us today. Congratulations on your hard work there. This is really fun. And for now, I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder with this edition of Alaska Weather Facts, and I'm going to go play in the sandbox there. We'll see you next time.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Moving on to your sea ice edge now, with the current weather in the Bering Sea and strong southerly winds coming up wave after wave after wave. It looks like the newest forecast from the Alaska Sea Ice Program is going to take the ice edge now and move it north and east about 30 to 40 nautical miles. So that's going to change the ice around St. Matthew Island, south and west of Nunivak Island, and certainly in the Kuskokwim Delta. And you can see a lot of erosion of the ice edge that was in Bristol Bay. A lot of that's gone now too, and a lot of changes here in the northern parts of Cook Inlet. A lot of what we're looking at yesterday along some of the west coast of the state has filled back in at least a little bit down toward Eetolan Strait, west and south of Umanak, and northwest of the Kuskokwim Delta. You can still see some marginal areas of ice. Chances are there is some open water in that area. Let's take a look at southeast now. A lot of changes coming in the next couple days. We're talking about with that cold air mass dropping south, where the pressure gradient is tightening up substantially. So that means a couple things for you. First of all, it's going to be windy. A lot of cold air is spilling through the gaps and the passes, and you're going to see a lot more gusts here. Notice in Stevens Passage and into the Lynn Canal, we're talking about 40 to 60 knot gusts out of the north and northeast. A lot of places that will be getting cold, and with that comes wind chill. So not only will it feel cold, but it will be cold. It will feel even colder. And if you're out on the water, heavy freezing spray may be a real threat here, especially for the central and northern parts of the Inside Passage there. So make sure you have a way to check on your weather information and stay up to date as we go through the next couple days, because the winds and the cold are going to be a factor in southeast. You'll notice offshore winds not too bad, but there will be stronger gusts in the gaps and passes, as there always are. Northerlies will strengthen across the southern parts of the Inside Passage on Friday to 25 knots. We're still holding on to sustained winds at 40 knots from Stevens Passage into the Lynn Canal with 55-knot winds there. Probably looking at some strong winds on land, at least in Skagway too. And you can see the wind blowing out of Cross Sound, 40 knots there with a 10-foot sea, at least 11-foot seas outside of the Dixon entrance, 40 knots coming off of Yakutat, sustained with a 10-foot sea. For South Central, we're also going to be watching some of the strong winds blowing out of the Copper River Delta there, gusts to 45, at least 20 knots sustained with a 6-foot sea. Northerlies inside of Prince William Sound, probably looking at some stronger gusts around Valdez. And northerlies coming down Cook Inlet 10 to as strong as 30 knots over the Barrens with a 7 to 8-foot sea. That improves a little bit on Friday. North and easterly winds across the northern Gulf, 20 knots inside of Prince William Sound with a 3-foot sea. 3-foot seas in the open water in the northern inlet, 11-foot seas west of the Barrens. And as we look at southwest, Bristol Bay, not too bad. Easterlies 10 knots and 1-foot seas in the open water there. And south and easterlies across the southern end of the Alaska Peninsula. That'll be some of the strongest, looking at about 4 to 12-foot seas, the highest of which will be across the North Pacific. Northwesterlies will be moving over Kodiak Island. 25 knots are expected inside of Shelikof Strait with a 5-foot sea, 7-foot seas on the eastern side. Northeasterlies coming down through the Shelikof Strait region on Friday with a 5-foot sea. Easterlies strengthen in Bristol Bay, and southwesterlies start to pick up coming up the Alaska Peninsula with 6 to 14-foot seas on either side, the highest of which will be in the North Pacific. Across the chain, we're expecting south and easterly flow for the central and eastern parts of the island, anywhere from 15 to almost 20-foot seas there from Atka to Unalaska. And as you move westward, stronger winds are expected closer to the core of low pressure at 27-foot. We're looking at 45-knot winds that are coming in from the south, and as we get into Friday, a little bit of improvement there, but also expecting to see some strong gales, maybe some low-end storm force winds across the North Pacific waters there, with seas coming up to 30 feet, anywhere from 11 to 15-foot seas there across the Bering Sea coast, with 25 to 32 feet across the western chain with 50 knotters out there on Friday, so be extra careful. Across the west, offshore winds continue, and with that we do expect to see warmer air moving in and chewing away at that southern edge of the ice. Wind speeds generally 15 to 35 knots, and in the open waters you're looking at about 11 to 13-foot seas there from St. George up to St. Matthew. Look for a little bit more of a south and southeasterly shift on Friday. 25 to 30 knots continue, 35 knots from the east around St. Lawrence Island. And in the open water, 12 to 15-foot seas expected. Across the ice in the north, a north and westerly flow continues for the Beaufort Sea coast, 10 to 20 knots there. East and north winds coming off the Chukchi coast, 20 knots sustained, 30 knots around the Bering Strait. As we get into Friday, 35 knots pick up from the east around St. Lawrence Island. Remember that winter storm watch is posted for this area. That could mean blizzard warning is coming as we get into Friday. Easterlies continue over the Beaufort and the Chukchi Sea now with sustained winds 20 to 35. Recapping tonight's weather, the pressure gradient is going to be the big story for southeast going in toward the end of the week here. Watch for cold, watch for wind, and heavy freezing spray. Snow will continue across some of the southern coastal areas, but generally dry weather for most of the interior. As a new Bering Sea storm moves closer to the coast, periods of heavy snow and wind will move into Norton Sound.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.